Welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show, your one-stop shop for weird news, spooky, and otherworldly and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow Creepin' It Real Show on Twitter at creepin_it. You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com. You can also go to our website, creepinitrealshow.com.
Hello and welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show. This is your overly enthusiastic for 8 in the morning on the West Coast host, Miss Moni. And I'm super excited about our topic today, but I suppose I should bring in my co-host first to help me on this journey. I'm going to throw it over before he mutes himself again. Mr. Yardley, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. Sunny day here in Atlanta. I'm a little bit tired, but ready to rock with y'all.
You had an adventure yesterday. Was it paintballing or what did you go out and do?
He was shooting.
Like paintball. Just a day at the outdoor range. I had fun as usual. Yeah. Gotta stay on top of things.
He doesn't just play shooting on TV. He goes out and does it in the real world too.
So before I bring you in, Christy, regarding shooting real quick, I found out yesterday that I'm an heiress to a small fortune of weapons, some of which are considered felonies in my state.
Oh.
So that's going to be a fun thing to navigate when I come into that inheritance. So that's what I found out yesterday. Some folks, I love you. I don't mind guns, but I didn't know that I own 3 safes worth of various weapons and ammunition. And
silencers then you have no excuse. You better figure out the laws and go out there and practice your freedoms. But then again, you're in California, so y'all are a little bit less free, gun-wise than Georgia.
And that's the other issue: is these guns are going to have to be brought back over state lines for sales purposes. It's going to be fun, y'all. So,
oh my gosh.
And Christy, how are you doing? Not as exciting as that, I bet.
No shootings here, no guns here. I've just been surviving, so can't complain. Excited about the holidays because I enjoy them, and I'm excited about our show getting back on the horse and doing some good horror talk. Horror talk too.
Horror talk with horrors. Oh my God, we should have called the show that. Horror talk with horrors.
I'm sure Yardley would have loved that.
So on that note, let's talk about what we've been watching, starting with Mr. Yardley. What kind of horror talk do you have for us?
I guess that I'm kind of late on the bandwagon, but I was watching Salem, which is on Hulu. It's a supernatural horror television series, and it's kind of loosely inspired by the 17th century Salem witch trials. Mm-hmm. There's 3 seasons of it. The first season was all right, but it started kind of to, at least in my opinion, decline a little bit as far as the storyline, and and it just seems like they kind of lost what they had in season 1. Like you got less interested in characters. Some characters will disappear, and then you'll forget that they're there, and then they'll pop up because you know that they had to give them something to do because they hadn't killed them off. It's just kind of weird. And I think the writing and the delivery of lines from a lot of actors and actresses that don't have as much chemistry as you would like. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it's 3 seasons, but it's solid. I would probably give it a 5 or a 6 out of 10. So I would recommend it. The effects are great, and it has a lot of potential. So there's enough there to hold you in.
Nice, especially going back into quarantine times, and we'll be off for the holidays off and on. So it sounds like a good watch. Mm-hmm. Miss Christy, what have you finally jumped on my bandwagon? Yeah. What's up, girl?
I was afraid to for a very long time, and now that I am on the almost done with the third season, I am very much aware that yes, I made the right call not to start watching that until now. The Handmaid's Tale. I've begun watching, and I've literally binged so much of it that yes, if you can do the math, I started watching it. When did I get back in town from work? Thursday? It's Saturday. I'm on season 3. So, because I got
That's a dark place to go. That is a dark place to
it
be
is.
in so long.
Yes, what little sleep I've gotten, because I have had, I didn't really say much at the beginning, but I've been sick with some shit and just run down from work. But I have started dreaming, and in my dreams, it's things that I'm doing that I would normally do, but in the movie or in the show, I wouldn't be allowed to do. So I'm like sneaking around and worried about just doing everyday life in my dreams because I've been watching so much of The Handmaid's Tale. But it's a great story. I mean, the writer, holy crap, I never read the book, and so I knew based on, just talk what it was about, but it is an amazing story, scary as hell, to be honest with you. And just, I think even more now, some of these, books that have been written about things that we thought would never be possible. I mean, just how quickly and easily they could be possible, I think, is what makes this an actual horror series to me. I mean, I think it's something that could happen. So very good, very well. I mean, Elizabeth Moss, isn't that her name? She's amazing. She's brilliant. And the actress who plays Serena I am like having major girl crush on.
She's just this hot.
Yeah,
kind of
she's Australian or something, and she's hot. Oh, she's gorgeous. Yeah. I have a huge crush on her. So,
but also she's like the worst, right?
Yeah, she's horrible. Yeah, she's awful and horrible, but she's hot, and so. Yeah. She's helped.
You also think
yes. So, in Joseph Fiennes, I used to freaking love him. And
he used to be so fine, but not so much.
I mean, he plays that part well. It's a great series. And so anybody who's been holding out like me, check it out and just be horrified and terrified at how easily things can happen.
Probably not your future now, so you might be able to watch it with some sense of,
that's why I started watching it. I thought, if I'm going to watch it, I kind of ran out of shows, and I've been true criming the crap out of myself. So I was kind of like, I need to do something else. So I had tried watching it before, and I turned it off like 10 minutes in. I was like, nope. And this was like a year ago. So nice. I thought, I think it's time to revisit The Handmaid's Tale. So I'm super into it. It's good. You guys should all check it out.
Nice. All right.
What about you, lady?
I watched the movie, which is actually in theaters as well, but we don't have any theaters open here. It's called The Dark and the Wicked, and you can rent it for $7.
Oh, nice.
I liked it until the end. So The Dark and the Wicked, it's demonic possession stuff. It's isolation horror. It's well acted. The writer-director is the same person who did the original Strangers, which y'all know I love the original, not that horse shit that they did a couple years ago, but the original Strangers. And so he builds a great atmospheric, but it is, a lot of people liked it. It's got a 6.2 on IMDb. I would recommend it. I hated the ending. Mm-hmm. The ending was terrible, and it was a little longer than it needed to be getting there too. So I would probably just give it a 5. It's got some great moments, but I love the movie overall. And then I actually watched Run. You guys have probably seen it's on Hulu right now, but it's also in theaters, or it was going to go to theaters. It's got I can't remember him, the Nurse Ratched chick that's in all of the seasons of American Horror Story.
Oh, yep. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I love her. Why can't I think of her name? Dang it.
Anyway,
now you're going to
Run.
make me.
It's based loosely on the Gypsy Rose story.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, but it's not as cheesy, and it's it's just more, it's psychological, it's suspense, and it's really well done.
Sarah something. Sorry.
The acting almost solely falls on Sarah Paulson.
Thank you.
Yeah, as a young lady who plays her daughter, and it's really well done, and it gives you ups and downs and feels, and I really love the ending, and I totally recommend it. Little bit predictable, but that's also because we've seen this story before. Also, for the first time ever, this movie's old, 2001, young Matthew McConaughey, but I watched Frailty. Do you guys remember Frailty, about a dad who thinks he sees demons in people and brings them home to kill them?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I liked it. Did you guys remember enjoying
Yeah, I
it?
liked
It's been
it.
so long.
This is the one where it's the son. He had the two sons, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, yeah. I thought that was
Matthew
good.
McConaughey
Mm-hmm.
is grown up and reporting it to
That's
the
right.
police that his
And
dad used to be the serial killer.
And there was a good twist there. I remember
There's
at the
a good
ending.
twist there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's enjoyable. The only thing about it is nowadays we're so spoiled with true crime where you can get on Netflix and watch stories about people actually talking about their dads having been serial killers.
Yeah.
So it's not that shocking for this year,
Yes.
unfortunately. It was well done and well acted, and I did enjoy it. It's a heavy movie, but it was a good one. So also, just as we start to talk about this show, I have unfortunately been watching Ghost Adventures with Zach Bilbo Baggins, and I tried to embrace it because so the thing is, I'm experiencing wanderlust. I really miss traveling. I want to go all the places. And so I've been starting to watch some of these terrible horror, like these little ghost adventure shows, because they go to the most amazing places that I want to go see. But also, they're an hour long. The first half hour is okay because they give you like the historical background and you get the beautiful camera shots of whatever place they're at. But the second half is just Bilbo Baggins like roiding out, screaming at his staff, screaming at everyone, like, demanding that poor souls that didn't do anything wrong in their lives and had terrible deaths come out and fight like a man. And it's fucking.
Brother. I hate when they do that.
I really try. And like I said, I get through the first half hour of several episodes when it's somewhere interesting that I want to go to, but oh my God. So anyway, that was my preparation for this show in part. There's a lot of research in this show, and it also focuses on someplace I actually visited, and I learned a lot. So some of this will be kind of psychological horror, some of this will be kind of historical, and some of this will be straight up body horror that we all love to get into here. But our main topic is the horrors of medical experiments. But with that, it's also going to include a little bit of the history of mental illness and the practice by which we've learned and come forward in the history of it around the world, and then specifically in America, and talking about the asylums and the poor farms that used to be run. And our sources for this include Concordia St. Paul, which is some of the history of mental illness, Unite for Sight, which is a mental health advocacy, KCET, because it talks about the poor farm that we're going to talk about. There's a website on the history of vaccines, and it talks about the testing of human subjects. And then we get into the legend, which is maybe it's a cryptid, maybe it's bullshit, maybe there's some truth in it. I'll tell you my opinion of the melon heads. So, and then Ranker has a story about the top legends of the melon heads. So, Yardley, if you want to get us started with some backstory and a little bit of history, we would love it.
All right, let's do it. So, many cultures have viewed mental illness as a form of religious punishment or demonic possession. In ancient Egyptian, Indian, Greek, and Roman writings, mental illness was categorized as a religious personal problem. In modern times, mental illness affects many individuals in the United States. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, approximately 1 in 5 American adults experience mental illness each year. With data like this, it's no surprise that attitudes towards mental health have changed for the better in recent years, yet the stigma still exists. CNN reports that 90% of Americans have mental and physical health equally, according to a 2015 survey by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. This hadn't always been the case, however. Mental health treatment has undergone extensive change over the years, with some strategies being ineffective and even dangerous. Mental health hospitals and deinstitutionalization.
Yeah, we've come a long way. We still got a long ways to go, though.
I mean, it does seem like a lot of times, like the things as far as funding and things that can support this stuff, like the wrong things are getting cut at the wrong times.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So especially during a time like this where I know, everybody has an elbow on them with so much stuff going on, but these services are especially needed when you've got a pandemic and, unemployment, a lot of things like that going on. So hopefully we can right the ship a little bit better on this.
You're preaching. You're going to get my soapbox at the end of this of what I think we should be doing. But go ahead, Christy.
As somebody who has a mother in a mental institution right now, and the back and forth of decades that we dealt with her illness and the battles and the fear that we lived in constantly because they would just literally release her and not tell us. And then we find her walking naked down the street. With a knife in her hand. So it is a huge industry that desperately needs reinvention. There's just so many rights that you have to really respect for the patient. I'm sure we're going to dig into all that, but it is an exhausting, and I think there's just this huge need for mental illness advocacy, one, and then mental illness rights adjustments. But so
you're going to talk about a badass advocate female back in the 1840s. So that's
awesome.
Pretty cool.
Well, I like that. Back in the 1840s, activist Dorothea Dix lobbied for better living conditions for the mentally ill after witnessing the dangerous and unhealthy conditions in which many patients lived. Over a 40-year period, Dix successfully persuaded the U.S. government to fund the building of 32 state psychiatric hospitals. This institutional inpatient care model, in which many patients lived in hospitals and were treated by professional staff, was considered the most effective way to care for the mentally ill. Institutionalization was also welcomed by families and communities struggling to care for mentally ill relatives. Yep. All institutions were originally built with plenty of funding and great intentions. Most had areas for farming and gardening so that the asylum campus became self-sustained communities that were therapeutic to patients. Around the time of World War II, the state hospitals became overcrowded with the wounded and the broke, and the facilities became underfunded and understaffed. The institutional care system drew harsh criticism following a number of high-profile reports of poor living conditions and human rights violations. At the time, the medical community often treated mental illness with physical methods. This is why brutal tactics like ice water baths and restraint were often used. By the mid-1950s, a push for deinstitutionalization and outpatient treatment began in many countries, facilitated by the development of a variety of antipsychotic drugs. The significance of the antipsychotic drugs was that people could theoretically control their mental illness outside of the confines of the institutions. Unfortunately, they don't take their medications when they're not being institutionalized. So sure. That was what we ran into with my mother. Deinstitutionalization efforts have reflected a largely international movement of reform for the asylum-based mental health care system and move toward community-oriented care, based on the belief that psychiatric patients would have a higher quality of life if treated in their communities rather than in large, undifferentiated, and isolated mental hospitals.
So that's a little bit of the backstory, and we're actually going to get into it a little more in depth. That's a little bit of the explanation and a quick timeline of how the history of asylums kind of came and went. So I went into this with I'm going to tell this whole horrific body horror story of all the things they did in these places. And yes, that all happened. But it started off, and I didn't know this, with the best of intentions. I thought it was just a place that people were thrown out of cruelty. We don't know what to do with this person. They're not approachable or for society, so we're just going to stick them in this asylum. And yes, there was a lot of that. But it started off actually with best practices and very well, really good intentions. So I visited a place last week, actually took Dan with me. Well, Dan took me because he does the driving, but we went to LA, which is not an enviable drive if you're from our area. And there is still a 400-acre old, it's not just one asylum, it's an entire campus. And what it is was a community-based treatment area that was completely self-sustaining. At one time, it had all medical services. It had a fire department. It had everything you needed to live completely on this campus and actually be cared for and know everybody around you. So, and that was the case with most of these facilities that Dorothea Dix, as we mentioned, had built around the country. Was basically all of them started top-notch, well-funded, brand new, and with staff that was actually extremely well trained in mental and physical health for the time, and very excited and proud to go treat patients. So the case of what mental asylums were supposed to be when they were first built across the country between the 1880s and the 1900s. Within the small LA suburb of Downey sits what appears to be a ghost town. A mixture of overgrown, charred, and boarded up buildings sits behind chain link fences topped with barbed wire and gates locked with multiple padlocks. What is this ghostly place? It's beautiful, I'll tell you that. It's what remains of the Los Angeles County Poor Farm. For those unfamiliar with the term poor farm, and I was, they were large complexes funded and run by counties or towns to house the poor and destitute, which were often the elderly and the disabled. The places were also working farms, complete with fields, orchards, livestock, which were tended to the more able bodied residents. The farm aspect supplied residents with the food, and the excess was sold for profit. Poor farms began to disappear with the arrival of Social Security in 1935 and were a thing of the past by the mid 20th century. So another note on this, I found out like some of the ones in New York, for instance, they still stand, but they're not being used anymore. They actually were sustainable in their energy. So,
Oh, wow.
they were selling things for a profit. They were able to upkeep everything they were doing. They were had sustainable energy. I honestly feel like people who need help now should be able to go live this kind of way where everyone contributes, and if you can't, they take care of you.
Yeah.
So what was originally known as the Los Angeles County Poor Farm started in 1887 when the LA County Board of Supervisors decided to build a place for the area's homeless and purchased 124 acres of farmland near Downey. Since that time, Downey had grown to encompass the area of the Poor Farm. Yeah, it's now the Poor Farm is only 40 acres and it's shrinking. Buildings were constructed to house the inmates, as they were called, and other buildings served as offices and common areas. Trees and flowers were planted between to create peaceful setting for those who found themselves there. Some of the photos that I put below you, there's actually still lemon trees and they're growing like right through the middle of the buildings and stuff.
Oh, wow.
The first inmates arrived the following year and were looked after by Dr. Edwin Burdick, the superintendent, who was a doctor with a farming background. Just a few years later, the farm was producing fruit, vegetables, alfalfa, sugar beets, and had a collection of livestock, including cows, pigs, and chickens, which provided the residents with food, and that what wasn't consumed was sold, often making a surprising profit. And this person is writing in first person, says, during their visit, they were shocked to discover the lemon tree. Yeah, I have a picture of that. Over the decades, the farm grew, and by 1910, here we go, it was around 400 acres. The reasons why people arrived at the farm also grew, including mental illness and alcoholism. However, the relatively peaceful setting did not mean all the residents were at peace, and here's some of the horror element. There were a number of suicides, and eventually there was an investigation into the treatment of residents. A new superintendent arrived in 1915, William Ruddy Harriman, and he was 26 years old when he took over. He sought to bring about change, and he renamed it Hondo and ditched the term inmates, instead calling them patients. By 1929, the number of patients neared 2,000 and continued to climb with the arrival of the Great Depression. The Great Depression hit Hondo hard, and you'll find that in the history of asylums across the country. This is around the time when things started to become overcrowded and the conditions started to really go downhill. Funding virtually evaporated as the number of patients increased and a tent city had to be built. Another rename arrived in 1932 when the location chose to focus more on rehabilitation and medicine, and any of the ones that are still working at all are actually drug outpatient facilities. So it was dubbed Rancho Los Amigos, and that's really confusing because they kept that name and moved it across the street now, and it's a working place. So we went over there. We're like, this is an actual hospital. Why are we here? By 1934, Rancho sprawled across 540 acres with 2,700 patients. But with the implementation of the Social Security Act and the arrival of World War II, many were able to leave Rancho, moving to nursing homes, and the more able-bodied found work helping the war effort. Also during World War II, part of Rancho became an army base. At the end of the war, Rancho added a polio ward, and that's the other thing. Polio and other diseases that we didn't have vaccines for started to ravage these facilities. And it was a model hospital at the time, and the farm aspect became abandoned. In 1952, Harriman retired and passed away the following year. The aging poor farm turned to hospital, had run its course by the 1980s. And part of the reason for that was, I don't know if y'all remember hearing about Geraldo and other journalists going in and exposing across the country the horrible conditions. And we're going to talk about that, in which people were living. But that was a big part of why these kind of places were abandoned. They were too big to be financially feasible. And of course, the 80s was the Reagan era. We didn't want to put money into mental health. And then a lot of these places weren't treating people well anyway. So the whole idea was sort of abandoned. But you can see, these are not my photos, although I did take a lot. And one of them I posted to my Facebook page. I think I did post it to the Creepin' It Real Facebook page. Someone swears that they can see a ghost. My husband says it's a trick of the camera. But either way, in the video, you see a rush of light come at us.
Oh, wow.
From a dark, charred room. So check out the photos. The place it's abandoned. It's got a lot of graffiti, but it also is somehow, it's got a lot more greenery than you can kind of see in these photos. It's kind of beautiful. There's animals, little animals running around. There's feral cats all over the place. I want it to like be redone and let people kind of go back to living there, but that's just
it's funny. I know that, I've always had like these theories about taking these empty shopping centers and doing, and creating like homeless shelters or whatever. And of course that's never going to happen because the people that live around those buildings don't want homeless people, walking around their neighborhoods. But I mean, something like this, it just makes perfect sense. Somebody take this, rehabilitate it, and make it, because most homeless people are mentally ill. I mean, they're either veterans that were lost, slipped through the cracks, or mentally ill people who can't sustain a home life or a job, or they're, have addiction problems. I mean, it would just make sense to take care of them, especially the vets that, basically sacrificed their entire life for us.
And in California, we have such a major problem with homeless people just being everywhere. And I'm not saying it's unsightly. I mean, like,
they have nowhere to go. Yeah.
There's no standard for taking care of folks here. And this place, first of all, it belongs to the city. It's in prime real estate. I mean, Southern California, LA County real estate is worth a lot. So if someone wanted to tear it all down and turn it into housing or whatever else, I kind of get that just from like a business perspective. But because they have not done that, because it's still so many acres of prime real estate in the middle of LA County, like, why don't you
do something?
One of the houses actually is fixed up. It's gorgeous. Start there. Like, why don't you start using it? There's already so many homeless people that break in and end up, housing themselves there anyway. Like, why not just say that's what it's for? Come have a roof over your head. Unfortunately, the other issue, though, is in 2016, 3 arson fires broke out there. And obviously that's very, very dangerous in Southern California to have intentional fires started. But, if there was some kind of regulation, they spend so much time, the police patrol it constantly. They spend so much time trying to keep people out. Why not just let people in and monitor what they do? So, and then this is the shot at the bottom. The former superintendent's home was used as the exterior for Mud Creek Shady Rest Home in the 2002 horror comedy Bubba Hotep, starring Bruce Campbell as Elvis. But a fire severely damaged that building. And like I mentioned, the fire was just one of several. So that's part of why a lot of it's so, fenced off. And what's really interesting, too, is right across the street from it is the Rose Parade, where they build the floats.
Yeah.
Wow. Because there's property, there's space there. They took over part of that campus and that's how they're using it. So now we're going to get into the horror aspect of asylums going terribly wrong. So that was the best case scenario. Here's why we closed them.
So though that story paints a rosy picture, there were darker tales as well. There were occasional reports of inmate mistreatment. There were also stories of despondent residents like George Deacon, who drowned himself in a nearby river, and Bud Lewis, the farm's bread cutter, who jumped out of a window during a heated discussion. Those types of stories, and much worse, are extremely common when we study the history of mental health asylums. As we mentioned, across the country, they were almost always underfunded, filled with too many patients per number of staff available to provide care, and often almost completely unsupervised by anyone outside the asylum, allowing burnt out or truly wicked doctors, along with the staff, to take out frustrations on patients in the form of neglect, abuse, sexual assault, unauthorized, inhumane medical experimentation, and brutal medical procedures and practices under the guise of treatment. Some of the historically documented brutal treatments and experiments included trephination. As one of the earliest forms of mental health treatment, trephination removed a small part of the skull using an auger, bore, or saw. Dated from around 7,000 years ago, this practice was likely used to relieve headaches, mental illness, or even the belief in demonic possession. Not much is known about the practice due to a lack of evidence. Then you have bloodletting and purging. Though this treatment gained prominence in the Western world beginning in the 1600s, it has as its roots in ancient Greek medicine. Claudius Galen believed that disease and illness stemmed from imbalanced humors on the body. English physician Thomas Willis used Galen's writings as a basis for this approach to treating mentally ill patients. He argued that an internal biochemical relationship was behind mental disorders. Bleeding, purging, and even vomiting were thought to help correct those imbalances and help heal physical and mental illness. According to Everyday Health, these tactics were used to treat more than mental illness, however. Countless diseases like diabetes, asthma, cancer, cholera, smallpox, and stroke were likely to be treated with bloodletting using leeches or venesection during the same time period.
A lot of people died from that shit.
Yeah. And then you have the insulin coma therapy. So this treatment was introduced in around 1927 and was used for several decades until the 1960s. In insulin coma therapy, physicians deliberately put the patient into a low blood sugar coma because they believed large fluctuations in insulin levels could alter the functions of the brain. So insulin comas could last anywhere between 1 and 4 hours. Patients were given an insulin injection that caused their blood sugar to fall and then the brain to lose consciousness. The risks included prolonged coma, in which the patient failed to respond to glucose, and the mortality rate varied between 1 and 10%. So electroconvulsive therapy was later introduced as a safer alternative to insulin coma therapy.
Super safe and fun for everyone.
Mm-hmm. My grandmother had what do you call it? I guess that's what it is, where you put the electrodes on your head. Is that the one it's talking about? The electroconvulsive therapy?
I think so, yeah.
Electroshock therapy, I guess that's what she had. Mental illness is strong in my family. And no, don't say it. Explains a lot because I've already been tested, y'all. I'm good. Oh, anyway, let's move on to metrazole therapy. In metrazole therapy, physicians induced seizures using a stimulant medication. Seizures began roughly a minute after the patient received the injection and could result in fractured bones, torn muscles, and other adverse effects. The therapy was usually administered several times a week. Metrazole was withdrawn from the use of the FDA in 1982. While this treatment was dangerous and effective, seizure therapy was the precursor to electroconvulsive therapy, which is still used in some cases to treat severe depression, mania, and catatonia. So some people swear by electroshock therapy, which is, I'm assuming, is what this is, electroconvulsive therapy.
I would imagine, though, that there's different levels. Probably they were a little more harsh with it with patients they didn't give a shit about, as opposed to ones that can sue them now. So.
Exactly. From what I hear, it can restart the brain, but I don't think it lasts. I think it always, I don't know for sure. I can't speak for sure, but
brain restart.
Yeah, I'd love a brain restart right about now. Yeah. But my grandmother, I guess when she was younger, when she first had both, I think she probably suffered from severe postpartum depression. And back then they really didn't know what that was. So
she was just a hysterical woman with her hormones and shit.
Yep. Yeah. So they took her to a mental institution and they gave her electroshock therapy, and she never left her house again. She was agoraphobic who died in isolation and had severe mental illness. So, and now her daughter is in a mental institution with severe mental illness. So scary things. And unfortunately, there's just not a lot you can do. So now we move on to lobotomies. This is awful. This now obsolete treatment won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1949. Like, that seems so not that long ago, that we were actually doing this, scrambling people's brains like eggs. That's just insane. It was designed to disrupt the circuits of the brain, but came with serious risks. Popular during the 1940s and 1950s, lobotomies were always controversial and prescribed in psychiatric cases deemed severe. Yeah, but who's to say whose is a severe case? Okay. It consisted of surgically cutting or removing the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes of the brain. The procedure could be completed in 5 minutes. Some patients experienced improvement of symptoms. However, this was often at the cost of introducing other impairments. The procedure was largely discontinued after the mid-1950s with the introduction of the first psychiatric medications. Ugh, lobotomies, man. That's insane. I mean, when you think about, just what we know today, like, the answer back then was sticking a ice pick up into your brain and scrambling that section of your brain. Like, I can't even begin to imagine. Nice. And, a lot of husbands were taking their wives to get this done because they were experiencing, like, hysteria, which basically they had PMS. You can't have a woman mouthing off. You gotta go take part of her brain
exactly. They wanted to go cheat. Like, they wanted to just do their thing. Yeah. Kind of take them off.
Exactly. The They're like, basically destroy her brain enough to where she can only can make me sandwiches and shut the fuck up. I mean, that's basically what a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Make babies, make sandwiches. Those are your two things.
A lot of influential people who had family members like this take them, like the Kennedys took, and like one of the sisters got a lobotomy and was never, she lived the rest of her life in an institution because
it can't have an embarrassing
It failed.
history.
Yes, we wouldn't want mental illness to be, then our bloodlines aren't strong and all this bullshit.
Yeah, because none of their behavior was ever seemed abnormal. But anyway.
Yes, I just watched I just got caught up on The Crown. The new season dropped, and that was another one I've been watching, which if you're not watching The Crown, y'all don't know what the fuck you're doing with your lives. But anyway, there was an episode where Princess Margaret found out there was like 5 family members living in a mental institution that were basically had Down syndrome or, as they would call it, retardation back then. And they were basically put in the history books as dead. And then, and nobody knew. Nobody knew these people existed, and she found them. And it's true. Like, they even ended the story posting the pictures of these people because we couldn't, the queen mom was basically, we couldn't let our bloodline look weak. And so she's like, she just fucking hid them away. It was crazy. Anyway, so we're going to talk about vaccine testing in vulnerable human subjects. In 1966, Henry K. Beecher, MD, published a study describing medical studies in which medical treatment was withheld from subjects for research purposes. Children and adults stuck in prisons and mental health asylums were involved. Surgeons performed experimental techniques with unknown effects. Infectious or harmful substances were deliberately introduced into a subject's body, so they were basically just like lab rats.
Yeah.
Some include vaccine research. One study was directed towards determining the period of ineffectivity of hepatitis. Artificial induction of hepatitis was carried out in an institution of mentally defective children. Jesus. The parents gave consent for the intramuscular injection or oral administration of the virus, often because it was the only way they were able to continue keeping their kids in the hospital, but nothing was told to them about the potential dangers. Other notable figures in vaccine research and development used similar practices. Werner Henel, MD, conducted a test of influenza vaccine in a prison population in a state home for the mentally retarded. His study design required administering a potentially unstable vaccine to his experimental group and then deliberately exposing them to influenza. Man.
Yeah, and this is part of the horror that I was mentioning that isn't just the traditional kind that we often talk about here. I want us to be outraged because some of this shit still happens. Our most vulnerable communities, including prison populations. Yes, people deserve to serve time for crime. but they're still doing vaccines and other types of things on people who cannot fend for themselves. And I want to also say, with historical context, and that's what we're going into next, is that it's not just American asylums. Human experiments have been conducted around the world. And this includes, of course, some of the notable ones that we've known about, like Nazis experimenting on soldiers or on Jews, and twins trying to make a master race. I honestly think not just Nazis, but around the world, some of these folks just straight up enjoy fucking around with people and are super, super sick in the head and just attach arms to weird places and do whatever the hell they want. Slave owners practiced abortions and other experiments in their plantations. Some of them would just do female genital mutilation, and the women would be in so much pain after that for the rest of their lives, more or less, that they were kind of unfit for society. They couldn't have children or any of that stuff. And Soviets tried to create super soldiers. So, and like I said, random sick freaks experimenting on inmates, the elderly, and the infirm. A lot of was done on mentally disabled children or on children who just happened to be orphans. And again, as I had Christy mention earlier, some of that was the parents knew about it and had to give consent, but part of it was if they did not, the children would no longer be cared for and the parents couldn't afford to care for them. So that's a real shitty rock and a hard place. And of course, they sometimes weren't told all the information, and sometimes they were and they didn't care because they considered their children defective. Yep. So that's lovely. But we'll never know the full extent of the tortures that people have been put through under the guise of healthcare and under mandated institutionalization. That being said, there is the legend of the melon heads. They could be folklore. They could not be true at all. They could be legendary cryptids. That's another possibility. Or they could be the result of medical experiments conducted on children in American asylums in various states. So I'm going to read one of these. In American folklore of Ohio and Connecticut, melon heads are beings generally described as small humanoids with bulbous heads who occasionally emerge from hiding places to attack people. The melon head stories of Ohio are primarily associated in the suburb of Kirtland. According to local lore, the melon heads were originally orphans under the watch of a mysterious figure known as Dr. Crow. Crow is said to have performed unusual experiments on the children, who developed large hairless heads and malformed bodies. Some accounts claim that the children were already suffering from hydrocephalus. That's a dirty name when you're talking about phallus. Anyway, it's a condition in which the acclimation of cerebral spinal fluid occurs in the brain. So basically it causes brain swelling due to fluid. And this dude was injecting even more fluid into their brains, which would have caused them more mental health issues, including seizures and a whole lot of pain. And it gave them their characteristic large, misshapen heads. Eventually, the legend continues. The children killed Crow, burned the orphanage, and retreated to the surrounding forests. And they supposedly feed on babies, which is just like that reeks of the stigma of the mentally ill or things we don't understand. Is like, okay, I could kind of see why you'd want to get rid of your torturer after years of suffering. But apparently you feed on babies because you're different than other people. So Anyway, legend holds that the melon heads may still be sighted along Wisner Road in Kirtland.
All right, well, let's talk about the melon heads of Junction Insane Asylum. So there's an abandoned building near Felt Mansion in Holland, Missouri. Aren't there two MIs? It's Missouri, right? MI is Missouri?
Michigan, I thought. No? Am I wrong?
Okay. Well, Holland, Michigan. The government insists that it was part of the Dunes Correctional Facility, a low-security prison that was shut down. Some locals, however, believe it was once the site of the Junction Insane Asylum. The Allegan County Historical Society has claimed that the asylum never existed and is just part of a local lore. But maybe it did exist, and maybe it had something to do with the melon heads. One version of the legend goes like this. Some children with hydrocephalus, a condition that causes the brain to swell with excess cerebrospinal fluid in the head, tends to appear enlarged. They lived at the Junction Insane Asylum. They were mentally and physically affected as a result of their condition and because of the experiments performed on them by the staff. Some say that they became feral and could no longer be contained in the facility, causing them to escape or be released into the woods surrounding the facility. The story goes that they continue to live in the woods, where they have become even more wild and mutated into melonheads.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and putting my historical, my background as a librarian who's done a lot of history research in the past, this legend exists in so many states that had asylums and the origin is so similar each time that there probably is some kernel of truth. And actually, one thing that I found that is documented, and I didn't include it here because it's basically just history and not horror, but it is the fact that when these facilities were shut down, as we talked about, that some of the patients were just let go. Like, boop, just go, because you don't have a family to go back to that wants you. You don't fit in society, and you're physically disabled in a time where that's not allowed, in polite company. And so they literally let people go, and they did go and live in the wooded areas around where these institutions used to exist. That being said, also you get a lot of, to this day, as I talked about with the one in Downey, you get a lot of homeless and still mentally ill and all kinds of people still living in these areas because it's a shelter that people aren't patrolling or bothering them around. But the cryptid thing pisses me off because you're basically looking at a vulnerable population. There's no one more vulnerable than orphan, disabled, physically malformed children back in whatever day, that got away. And to say that they turn into cryptids would mean a lot of things from a biological perspective, that they would have to have made these whole communities inbred, not gotten caught. There would have to be a lot of them to make the kind of cryptid appearances that people film and swear are these terrible melon heads coming out to rip your face off and eat your baby and all that stuff. So just because a person doesn't behave to the cultural and societal norms that we have today does not mean that they want to eat your baby because it's a delicious treat for them.
Right.
So that's my final word on institutionalization and the history and the horrors that were done. However, there is going to be kind of a continuation, a part 2 of this show. My next time doing a show is in December, so y'all will have to wait till then. But this is part of why I watched Bilbo Baggins, because he got access, his team got access to a place that no longer allows access, and I'm dying. So I've been to Venice, Italy. Have either of you ever been?
No, I have not been to Italy yet.
Okay. Italy's fucking beautiful. Venice is gorgeous. I want to go back. And there's this little island off of Venice that is equally beautiful. The weather's beautiful. Everything's amazing. It is an island called Poveglia. And if you look it up, it still has an asylum that's falling apart on it. And it was a place that people were literally sent when they were ill or criminals or both to die horrible, lawless deaths. And so many bodies would pile up that they would burn them. And to this day, the sand is made primarily of the ashes of burned bodies of people that came before on this terrible place.
Wow.
But it's beautiful. Yeah, it looks gorgeous. And so, of course, in the Bilbo Baggins Ghost Adventures show, I think it's season 8, he goes to it and you get a little bit of the history. And then he starts trying to fight the ghosts, and he literally starts roid raging. I think it was roid rage, honestly. He's super jacked, and he pisses off the locals, and they leave him there. You can tell that the poor local Italians were pissed, and they leave him there for the lockdown overnight, and he's like ripping his shirt off trying to fight people, like his own crew,
Is he the one that's always like, I'm being possessed by the spirits? Yeah.
Yes.
Give me a break.
Yes, that's him. And these poor wretches had the most horrible lives imaginable. It was basically like, you're not fit for society, so we're going to send you out to this island to die alone. And he's just exploiting the shit out of this and screaming at them and just anyway. But
I don't understand the draw of watching somebody who thinks every time he's somewhere haunted that it's a demon. Like he always thinks there's demons.
Alpha male.
Yeah.
And
no interest.
I'm like, these people were human beings that should be treated with some semblance of respect, that died alone and scared in the most horrible conditions you could think of.
And now they've got this abusive roider coming at them.
So by all means, call them demons and scream at them. He's a
Yeah.
dickhead.
Yeah, he is.
I'll say that on record.
Yeah,
But
I concur.
Anyway, the island's beautiful. The stories are fascinating and tragic. It's something I had never heard of before. And I encourage you to check in. If you liked this show, it's going to be even more horror based. We're going to talk about Poveglia Island in Italy.
Awesome.
But that's not next week. That's coming up in December. So Christy's going to tell us what we're doing next week.
Yeah, so I thought we could dive into another serial killer episode. My personal favorite serial killer, Edmund Kemper. I think he is just the most bizarre dude out there of the serial killers. He's just something. He's huge. He's like 6'7", and he was a necrophiliac, a cannibalist, and a serial killer. And he's actually a genius. And so he fascinates me. Not in the way that I enjoy serial killers or anything, but as his mind is incredibly fascinating. So I think it would be something fun to talk about, and maybe we can dig up some stuff that maybe others might not know about him.
Are we literally going to dig up some stuff?
Literally. I'm going to go out there and dig it all up. He also was on, and I don't really know how accurate this was, but Mindhunter, he played a role with helping bring down the Atlanta child murderers. I believe it was the case that he was talking to the FBI about to help figure out who this person was, because once he was in prison, he loves himself quite a bit and loves to hear himself talk. And like me, maybe, actually assisted quite a bit with quite a few other serial killer cases because he is incredibly intelligent.
I was just saying, you're telling me a white male of a certain age who thought that he should choose who lived or died, wanted to hear himself talk and like to get prestige for that.
Love to hear himself talk. He considers himself incredibly intelligent because he actually is an intelligent dude. So we're going to dive in on this guy and see if we can tell his story. And I'm really excited about it. So that's that. That's what we gonna do.
Nice. Yardley. Oh yeah, give your socials, Christy.
Yes,
and we'll get Yardley's and his final thoughts as well.
So you can find me Creepin' at Christy on Instagram and Creepin_it on Twitter. Although I mean Twitter's kind of, I don't know. I ebb and flow on there, but yeah, that's where you can find me.
You can find me on Twitter at militant_marketer, and I do look forward to a continuation of this conversation. Yeah. And whenever you get your chance in December. And yeah, Christy, I know that wasn't Edmund Kemper was someone who we quickly discussed in another show, right?
He was one of our dates for the
Yeah, he was one of the dates.
Yep.
Okay. That's right. So yeah, I definitely look forward to kind of an expansion on this.
Yes, he's quite the character.
Yeah, to say the least.
Sometimes when you're doing research on these people, it is mind-boggling that they exist. Like, truly. Yeah. I mean, facts are way stranger than fiction. That's for sure.
Oh, show. You can find me at Moni Bear across the board, but I'm more interested, and I want to thank Steve and, of course, my two co-hosts here have actually donated, and the guy sitting behind me, Dan, has helped out with the fundraiser for the Creators Assemble, and it's benefiting Make-A-Wish kids in San Diego. It's real quick. It's called Holiday Heroes, and we are turning kids who are critically ill into superheroes through the use of really talented up-and-coming comics illustrators. And I cannot wait to show you guys all the work they've done. The social media for Creators Assemble has some of the early sketches, and these creators have gone above and beyond with making up stories to cheer up the kids about how their superhero origin stories. They had a list from Make-A-Wish of the kids' favorite things, and that wish list then they incorporated into their illustrations. So one child can never have a pet, but that he loves dogs, and so his superhero has a sidekick who is a dog. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing, tear-jerking. I can't wait to tell you guys some more of the kids' stories. But if you are unable to donate, totally get it. You can go to creatorsassemble.org though, and the donation link is there. We also have a Venmo now, if you'd prefer that method instead of PayPal. It's at Creators Assemble. We also have, you can go to GoFundMe and search Creators Assemble. We should be the first one on there with Make-A-Wish. It's a really cute picture of a really cute one of the Wish kids, little boy. But if you can at least share that, I have the information on our Facebook page. I would really appreciate the share because we're a little light in the number of people donating, and I would really like to see us get more funding. The funding goes towards printing out these photos in a poster size. We're going to frame them and deliver them to the Wish Kids in San Diego over the holiday season. We're also going to give a little stipend to the creators for their hard work in this. And the funding also, so it helps with the printing, the framing, the delivery, and a stipend for the illustrators. But also the more funding we get, the more kids we can actually turn into superheroes, because we're looking to do this in the new year as well. We've only been able to include 11 children so far, and we're leaving some of these kids out, and that's really sad because they all are in this place together and they might see that their friend has a cool superhero. We really want to avoid sad, hurt feelings. So if you guys could help us out, every $50 sponsors one more kid, $100 sponsors the whole process. So if you could help out or share, that would be extremely appreciated. And we thank Make-A-Wish San Diego for letting us do this for the kids in their program, because I know the kids are super excited and the families could really use the pick-me-up right now. So anyway, creatorsassemble.org. Thank you for listening to that. Thank you for listening to our show. Like I said, a couple of our listeners have donated to that as well, and I appreciate every single one of you. So take care, be safe, have a good Thanksgiving. Try not to lick each other. Wear your fucking masks. Don't get sick. And we'll see you on the flip side. Thanks, guys.
To show how much I love you, darling, I would shoot the mayor. They'd lock me in a psycho ward, but I wouldn't care. I'd stroll into the courtroom in my straitjacket and tie. And when they put me on the stand, here's what I'd testify. I'd say I'm crazy, crazy, crazy. I'm crazy, crazy, crazy. I'm crazy, crazy, crazy about you. I'm just crazy, crazy, crazy. I'm so crazy, crazy, crazy.